Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to cross the Øresund once again, and we're going back to Copenhagen in Denmark, and we're going to revisit one of the iconic Danish gypsy breweries once again. And this is a beer that I think will be very interesting because it is kind of somewhat related to one of my favourite beers that I've ever had from this brewery. So for this one we are going to return to Mikkeller, and we're having a taste of the 3000 IBU today, which comes in at 15.5%, and it is a triple IPA. So the beer that I was referring to a little minute ago was the 1000 IBU, and that's been on the go for a good number of years. Now this beer is part of a recently released kind of three-member series, if you like. So there's the 0 IBU, the 1000 IBU, and the 3000 IBU. These were released through the small partiers in Systembolaget here in Sweden on the 8th of November 2019. From what I understand, the 1000 IBU, the version that's out now, is a new recipe, basically. So the original one was always like 9.5%. Whereas the new one is somewhere in the region of 12% from what I understand. So I actually didn't buy a can of that, but I think I'll need to go to Hansa in Malmö and get one and see about reviewing all three of these beers for you, since the recipe is a little bit different. But you will see all three of these beers reviewed over the next little while. But this is the one that I really wanted to kind of kick off with, because it seems like it's going to be even more of a beast than the original 1000 IBU was. So very curious to try this one. The main reason is for the fact that your palate can only take 100 IBUs. It can only detect the difference between 100 IBUs. So this beer is hopped to 3000 theoretical IBUs, and to do that you have to hop very early on in the a kind of boiling process, if you like, because the later that you add hops into the brew, the less the less bitter they become actually. So probably what this whole series is about is actually the point in the brew upon which you actually add the hops into the beer and get this level of bitterness. But it should be a really interesting one, and I sincerely hope that you guys enjoy my take on these three beers over the coming weeks. Actually, I'm very curious to see what these have in store. So anyway, as is usual with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Mikkeller before. No doubt I'll add some more in the near future. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the home page and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Danish beers that I've reviewed for you. That one's constantly being added to. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brew notes then, to tell you a little bit about Mikkeller then. So Mikkeller, as I've told you before, are the famous Danish gypsy brewery that was founded a couple of years back by Christian Keller and Mikkel Bjergso, although it's now run exclusively by Bjergso, who used to be a physics and maths teacher. Christian Keller, on the other hand, went to work for Soundhouse, if I remember the name correctly, which is a Danish music magazine. But again, these guys are very influenced by the American craft beer movement, and basically they started out as the homebrewing experimentations of Christian and Mikkel and just grew from there. Christian apparently left the brewery because he really wanted to focus on having a core range, whereas Mikkel wanted to do the whole experimental thing, and that's how Mikkeller have made their name, of course, actually. But for a long time these guys didn't have their own brewery. They brewed at a variety of host institutions, mainly in America, Norway, Scotland, and most of the beer was actually brewed in Belgium at the De Proefbrouwerij in Lokres de Heefde near Ghent in Belgium, which is where this particular beer was brewed. And for a long time their home base as such was the Mikkeller bar in Copenhagen. The original one is on Victoriagade, which is quite close to Warpigs near the train station in central Copenhagen. But they also have a collaboration bar with Toil as well, whose founders are former students of Mikkel's, and they've been very successful in recent years as well. In April 2016 though, they kind of moved away a little bit from their gypsy brewing roots and took over AleSmith's former brewery in San Diego after they moved to a larger space. And the following year, in 2017, they announced that they would establish a second brewery in Citi Field, which is the home of the New York Mets in New York, of course, as well, and that brewery is up and running too. They've also now got a location in Copenhagen which is called Baghaven. This is where they're experimenting with different sour beers. They've got lots of oak fodders down there that they range from about 3,000 to a good 7,000 litres or something like that. There's about 50 different 225 litre California Chardonnay barrels and things for them to age their beers as well. They brew the beers down at Warpigs, which is their collaboration bar that they have with Three Floyds from over in Munster in Indiana, and the beers are taken up to Baghaven and then they go through the aging process and the blending processes as well. And they've got a lab up there where they can take in like new strains of yeast and stuff like that from the wild and turn them into beer producing yeast as well, which is really quite cool. There's a tap room up there as well which serves a lot of these Mikkeller Baghaven beers as well, and they've got other beers from sour breweries too. I did a little out and about video for Mikkeller Baghaven as well, and that's a really interesting district of Copenhagen as well that I highly recommend you check out. It's a little bit out of the way but definitely worth going up to visit if you get the chance. But these days Mikkeller also have lots of bars across the world. There's ones in, I've got the list here, Barcelona, Berlin, Warsaw, Bucharest, Stockholm, Reykjavik, Tórshavn in the Faroe Islands, Tokyo in Japan, Seoul in Korea, Taipei in Taiwan, Singapore, and they've got various locations around Copenhagen, San Diego over in California, and then Bangkok in Thailand as well. So to be honest with you, this is probably the best known Danish craft beer name these days. They've got some really excellent beers. As I said, one of my favourites was the original 1000 IBU. The Black Hole is a great beer as well, and I've tried a good few different things from Mikkeller over the years that have been very, very interesting. But probably the two that stick in mind, like I said, would be the different versions of the Beer Geek and also the original 1000 IBU, and then the Black Hole Imperial Stout as well. That's the Black Hole Imperial Stout is absolutely beautiful, so make sure you try that if you get the chance. But yeah, that's all you really need to know about Mikkeller just now. A very interesting brew, like I said, and they're always doing little experimental things like this. So make sure you go and check out their RampantLionReviews restaurants in Copenhagen as well. Very authentic Japanese ramen, and Warpigs is definitely worth checking out as well. But yeah, let's get on to the actual tasting of this beer then, and we'll start the first of this three-part kind of mini-series if you like. So as I mentioned earlier on, this beer is a 3000 theoretical IBU, 15.5% triple IPA. You know, I've always been very curious about where the border with triple IPAs. I would probably say that it's around 10%. You know, I would always say that it's an imperial IPA when you go to about 8, and then it's a triple when you start to move above 10. So I don't know, could this be like a quadruple IPA or something like that? Who knows? But I thought this was quite interesting, and because this is the kind of thing that I always think about when I'm reviewing my beers, this little tongue here. So when I saw this on the label after I bought it, I thought that was kind of quite funny, because I always think about different areas of the tongue. I always think the middle of your palate has the kind of sweeter malty parts, the sides of your tongue gets the nice bitter kind of qualities, and then the front part of your tongue gets the kind of fruity notes, in my opinion. So yeah, it was kind of interesting to see that on the label of this one. But all three of the beers in this series have the kind of similar labels, if you like. So I think the 1000 IBU is a little bit more of a kind of limey green colour, and the 0 IBU is quite a bright yellow. But this is a 500ml can, and so a little bit bigger than the usual 440s that you get. And this particular beer, as I mentioned earlier, was brewed at the De Proef Brouwerij in Locriste Heefte in Ghent in Belgium. But there you can see that kind of iconic Mikkeller artwork on this one, and just a plain little top on this one as well. So yeah, without further ado then, let's get this guy out and we will get on with the tasting. I'm very, very curious to see what this beer has in store, and I think this is a good one to kind of kick off with after the 1900th review that you would have seen yesterday. So we've kind of gone from one extreme of Danish brewing to the other, if you like. So we've gone from Tisted and the Limfjordens Porter, who are, you know, it's one of the iconic older Danish craft beers, to one of the iconic new wave of Danish craft brews. So I think that's quite an interesting transition to make from 1900 to 1901. But yeah, just look at this beer. So you can tell kind of straight away from this one that this is probably going to be more of a West Coast IPA. And I mean, the original 1000 IBU was a West Coast double IPA, but getting very close to the triple, to be honest with you. I don't know what it was listed as on Untappd, if it was a double or a triple, but at 9.6%, you know, one of these grey areas, I guess. But as you can see with this beer, this has poured a lovely kind of rich golden amber colour. It's not the kind of darkest of ambers that you're going to see, but it is a really nice kind of West Coast type amber golden colour there. You can see one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones kind of moving up towards the bottom where that head was originally when we poured the beer. If I put my fingers behind the glass, you can see this beer is pretty much crystal clear actually. So it probably, I'd wonder if it has been filtered actually, because normally you would expect a little bit of haze, but when the beer poured you could see there was a thin foamy layer of a kind of creamy, very slightly beige coloured head on this one, but of course with it being 15.5% that is going to fade away really quite quickly. If I shine the light through this beer, it kind of stays pretty much the same. It's a light sort of orange. If you think about the skin of an orange, it's not too far away from that type of colour. It's not too far away actually from the skin colour of these guys on the can, to be honest with you. But yeah, nothing overly surprising about this beer in terms of appearance. You know, I wasn't expecting this beer to be a more New England type IPA. You know, you can't, I always think you can't really go above 8.5% with a New England IPA without it kind of getting very boozy and burny, to be honest with you. You really need to go on the West Coast route if you want these very high alcohol IPAs. So yeah, let's take a look at the aroma and just see how we got on. Nothing overly surprising about the appearance of this beer. Yeah. Now, this beer, it really comes across as a little bit sort of medicinal almost. It's almost got a little bit of that kind of cough syrupy type thing to it, which is quite interesting. I mean, of course, the highest alcohol IPAs that I can think of at the moment are probably, you know, like the Tactical Nuclear Penguin, the Sink the Bismarck, End of History, these things that Brewdog did a couple of years ago. I think the ones that Schwarzbräu in Germany were doing, they have the record for the world's strongest beer. The ones that they were doing, I think, were like Icebox and things like that. Pardon me. But yeah, so this beer, straight away, it smells very, very oily and very fruity. It's got that, it really has a kind of, how would you even describe that? It's just this really oily, fruity kind of mix, if you like. It's almost like you take a packet of Frutella or Chewits or Mawam or something like that. That's probably a good description actually. It really smells like a kind of boozy Mawam. I think that's a good way to kind of describe what's going on in this beer. It's very oily and very fruity straight away. I mean, going by the aroma of this beer, you could tell straight away that it's very boozy, but you wouldn't probably get the idea that it's supposed to be 3,000 theoretical IBUs. But I mean, as I say, you get a saturation point of 100 IBUs. So in some ways, this beer, in some ways it's a little bit pointless, but it's still really interesting from the beer geek perspective. That's the great thing about this. But yeah, a lovely big oily, fruity note to this one. It comes across as quite orangey. And it's like quite a juicy tangerine, so I'm wondering if there's a bit of mosaic in this, just because of the way those orangey notes come out. But at the same time, it's a little bit mango-y, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's citra in this as well. I might think, you know, I would be interested to see whether this is a citra and mosaic. There is something like very, very familiar about this beer, so I think it might be using a little bit of a classic citra mosaic mix. If I remember rightly, I think the original 1000 IBU was like Simcoe, citra and Amarillo. So, you know, the mosaic is kind of the one that has replaced Amarillo in a lot of instances. So I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the case there, because both of them give you some lovely orangey flavours and aromas. So yeah, nice little bit of an orangey note, lovely mango notes in there as well, and you know, there's nothing really kind of stronger than that. I think you're at the point where it is just big and oily. There's maybe a little bit of like an apricot-y, boozy apricot-y note to this one. You know, it's kind of along those lines, to be honest with you. It's a really nice smelling beer, this, I have to say. In terms of the hoppy side of things, to be honest, you actually don't get too much in the way of a green side of the hops. I was expecting you to get a massive blast of like floral aromaticity out of this beer, but really you only get a nice little bit of kind of grassiness to it. You can smell there's a nice little bit of a green grassy element to the beer. The malt base, I would say, is you know, there's a sweet caramel in there. You can smell that it's got a big boozy underlying though, so definitely some sweet caramel, a little bit of a toasty biscuity quality in there, but you know, overall it's a big caramelly, boozy, slightly grassy, oily, fruity triple IPA, this one. But I think, you know, the triple IPAs aren't going to give you the biggest complexity in terms of aroma, but it does have some very, very interesting things going on with it. So do take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer, but I think, you know, this is not the most complex aroma that you're going to come across in a craft beer, I don't think. So yeah, let's leave it at that and have a taste of the beer then. This one is 3000 IBU. A triple IPA, obviously a kind of West Coast style, coming in at 15.5% from Mikkeller, one of the famous, iconic Danish gypsy brewers then. Let's get stuck into this one, the first of a three-part series. Sláinte, skål. Yeah, it's interesting. It really is quite interesting. It's not quite what I was expecting. So I have to say, with this beer, it really is, you can detect elements of New England in this. I would not be surprised if there's a bit of oats added into the malt base with this beer. It didn't say on Mikkeller's website exactly what they put in this one. Mikkeller never do. But it would be interesting to know from them a little bit what particular style they were aiming for, because, you know, the original 1000 IBU was a very, you know, that beer, that must have that came out in what, like 2013, something like that. You know, that beer was a very straight up West Coast double IPA, but when you try this one, it really reminds me of some of the triple IPAs and things like that that I've had from Stigbergs, and that's a brewery that of course is very famous for its New England style IPAs. So there is definitely an element of New England to this beer in the flavour. I think there's you know, there's no doubt about that. But yeah, the beer itself is really nice. It's almost more like a kind of, it comes across almost kind of similar to like a liqueur or something like that. It's interesting. It really is quite interesting, this. You're not going to be blown away by the bitterness. I mean, 3000 IBUs, international bitterness units, you think this is going to blow your head off in terms of bitterness straight away, but really it doesn't actually. And again, this is the thing I was talking about earlier. You can only get 100 IBUs on your palate. The 3000 IBUs, the way they'll have done this is they'll be adding a lot of the hops kind of around the 1 hour mark in the boil, if I'm remembering my home brewing stuff correctly. Basically, the earlier you add hops in the brew, the more they are going to you know, in fact, I'm telling you lies. When you add them at the very, once you get the wort up to 100 degrees, the way to get the IBUs up is to add the hops early on in the boil. Then if you add them for like the last half an hour, you start to get the bitterness level kind of dropping, but the aroma and flavour profile going up. That's the way that the brew works generally. So what they'll have probably been doing with this one is adding, you know, like a hell of a lot of Columbus or Chinook or some, I'm not sure about Chinook from the flavour profile, but they'll be adding a bittering hop to really high levels early on in the brew in this beer, and then adding some flavour and aroma hops a little bit later on. I'm not sure exactly how they'll do it with this one, because you can still get some IBUs when it's the half hour mark left of the boil. And going by the colour of this one, it's not it's not an overly long boil, I would think, although the different types of malt can influence the colour of the beer as well. But you can really you know, with this beer, it's not as big and bitter as you might expect just going by the name. It's actually like a big, oily, almost liqueur-y type thing, to be honest with you. But yeah, now that we've gone over the kind of theoretical side of things, let's look at the actual flavour profile of this beer then. So straight away with this one, the middle of your palate is kind of, it's blanketed. You've got a little bit of a kind of bready, grainy kind of thing, but it really is quite minimal, that actually. You just feel a little bit of that pale malty base there, but then on top of that, you really can feel the boozy notes coming out of this beer. There's maybe a little bit of a woody undertone to this, but again, that's very, very minimal. If you go to the very centre of your palate, you've got a kind of big caramelly note to this one. As you move further out from it, it becomes a little bit more biscuity, and then you've got some woody elements as you move out towards the outer edges of that malty part of your palate, to be honest with you. And it's interesting to look at this diagram because you can feel the bitterness at the very back of your tongue with this one, but also I think on the sides of the palate as well. So back corners of the palate, there is definitely an element of earthiness to this one, and again that makes me think there's a little bit of mosaic in here, just because the mosaic has a very distinctive earthiness. It's not dark, it's not as dark as you can get from, say, English hops like Fugos or something like that, but it just has a little bit of that kind of darker earthiness. But as you come further forward along the sides of your tongue, it does evolve to be a little bit more floral and aromatic. I don't find this beer overly pine resinous, and I mean, normally if you want a big bitterness out of a beer, Chinook is a very good hop to use because you know, that's the big dark grapefruity piney resinous hop. But I don't get too much of that in this beer, to be honest with you. This one is a little bit more tropical and kind of orangey, to be honest. So yeah, moving further forward along the front parts of your tongue, there is a good little bit of floral aromaticity there, but around the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and more kind of grassy. But in fairness, you can feel some of that floral aromaticity just moving round the front of your palate there too, which is really interesting. But behind the front curve of the palate, of course, that's where you get that nice oily bubble, where those juicy fruity esters push their way out of the beer, but you can really feel that booziness from the centre of your palate pushing forward there. You get a good bit of alcohol warmth down here in the chest from this one as well, actually. This is a big beast of a beer. I'll be sharing this with my friend after the video, I can tell you that. But yeah, this is a really interesting beer, this. It's quite unusual compared to what I've had before, and if memory serves me correctly, this might actually be the heaviest IPA in terms of alcohol that I've ever had. I think that's right. Yeah, I think the only beer I can think of that's heavier than this that I've tried was actually one of the Evil Twin ones, but that was an Imperial Stout that was like 18%. The Tokyo from Brewdog, of course, is around the 18% mark as well. But in fairness, actually, I've told you a lie, because I did have a little sip of the Sink the Bismarck from the Brewdog. So yeah, that's the heaviest beer I've ever had, but this is the kind of heaviest beer that I've had a full can of, I guess you could say. The heaviest IPA that I've had a full can of, in fairness. So that's an interesting point to make about this one. But the fruity side of this beer then, I'd say it's mainly orangey. So yeah, at the back of that oily bubble, there's a wee bit of that kind of darker grapefruity, passion fruity note there. I'd say it's more of a passion fruit rather than anything else. So I wouldn't be surprised. There could be a little bit of a Simcoe in here. There could be something like that, because it doesn't come across as pungent enough to be Galaxy, which is the other big passion fruity hop. The other one that's out these days is Idaho 7, of course. But the fruitiness, as you come further forward from that, it evolves to be a little bit more mangoey, and then as you reach almost the kind of front part of your palate, this beer is distinctively more kind of light and tangerine-y, which to me is an indicator of mosaic, actually. I think there is a bit of mosaic and Citra, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a wee bit of Simcoe or something else in this one as well. So I mean, in terms of its flavour profile, this beer is quite... it's got a lot of the things you would expect of like a big double IPA, but you know, at 15.5%, it is a little bit of a monster. It's quite rare in beer reviews that I can feel the beer go into my head, but you know, with this one you really can. But at 15.5%, that's not surprising at all. So probably this beer review is going to be a bit longer because I'll be rambling because of the booze and stuff. But yeah, it's a big oily IPA, this one. But I think generally, if we're talking about this one in terms of its style and its flavour profile, it's got an element of the New Englandy note in this one. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of oatiness in this one, just because of the flavour that's there. On top of the kind of base of this beer, there is an element of an oaty note to this one. I don't get any wheat out of it really, But it's got the West Coast kind of booziness to it, and the way that the booziness comes out is definitely West Coast, but some of the flavours you get in the aftertaste, I think, in the middle of your palate are a little bit more sort of New Englandy, to be honest with you. But the big, the way that the bitterness comes out in this one is almost a little bit more New Englandy as well, actually. This beer is not as big and kind of resinous and things like that as you might expect. So a really kind of unusual one, this, from Mikkeller, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if Systembolaget have had this one sitting a little bit before it's come out, but it definitely gives the impression that it's still quite fresh, to be honest with you, at the same time. So not too sure about that. But I mean, it's an interesting one, and if you get the chance to try it, I do recommend that you have a go at this, because it's definitely an interesting beer, even if it's just for a kind of educational point. Is it the best beer in terms of flavour that I've had from Mikkeller? I'm not quite sure. I think the original 1000 IBU is probably my favourite IPA that I've had from these guys, but this is definitely an interesting one to try, and I'm curious to see what the new version of the 1000 IBU is like, and likewise the 0 IBU might be a very interesting beer as well, because again it's all about where you add the hops and the boil and things like that on the beer. So yeah, the mouthfeel then of this one, it's definitely a full-bodied beer, there's no doubt about that. Carbonation is very smooth. The mouthfeel of this one is definitely just a big oily, boozy monster, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, there's not even really wetness to this. This is just a big oily beer, this, rather than anything else. In terms of bitterness, it tells you on the can it's 3000 IBUs, but you know, I've had beers that have felt more bitter than this, to be honest with you. That's the interesting thing about this one. But around, the thing you will notice about the edge of your palate is it almost feels, in some ways, it's almost like that feeling you get when you wash your tongue, or when you wash your mouth out with Listerine. It's got a little bit of that almost minty kind of freshness to it, to be honest with you, which is quite interesting. You can feel that your tongue is being saturated a little bit by this beer, but at 3000 IBUs, you know, you should expect that. The middle of your palate then, there's a bit of that New Englandy smoothness to the beer, but you've also got a bit of the West Coast sweetness, but you really can detect the booziness in this one. There's a lot of alcohol warmth down here from this beer, but lovely big oily fruity notes, and it does almost come across as being slightly medicinal, and that's not just the Scottish side of me, because you know, high alcohol, medicinal, Scotland stereotypes, all of this kind of thing, but it's got a lovely big oily fruity note to it, and I do like the fruity side of this beer, I have to admit. So yeah, it's an interesting one. This is quite a good educational beer. Is it the strongest beer from Mikkeller? I don't think so, to be honest with you, but an interesting one to try, and a really cool review to make for you as well. So, you know, thumbs up to Mikkeller for this one. I don't think this is a beer that I will try again. I think this is probably a one-off, to be honest with you. But if the original 1000 IBU is there as it was at Baghaven, then that's one that I would definitely have a little go at. So yeah, let's just leave it at that for this one then. The 3000 IBU, a triple IPA at 15.5% from Mikkeller, one of the famous Danish gypsy breweries over in Copenhagen. A really interesting beer to try, very educational, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed my sort of rambling take on this one then. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Mikkeller as well. I'm sure I'll return to these guys at some point in the near future. You will be seeing reviews of the 1000, the new version of the 1000 IBU, and also the 0 IBU at some point as well. Keep an eye out for those, and we'll see what else we can do from Mikkeller beyond that. We do get their beers fairly regularly over here in Sweden. But thank you again for watching. Make sure you check out some Mikkeller beers, and I will catch you guys very soon. The Mikkeller 3000 IBU from Mikkeller over in Copenhagen in Denmark. Slange, skål, cheers.